There we go. My computer did not want to cooperate. It decided that it's not going to do its job. All right. So today we're going to be talking about scary story feedback. Because of the fact that I'm in the past have been not allowed to give feedback. I have this caveat because of the fact that now for high school teens and for the adult category, I will be allowed to give feedback. Sorry, middle schoolers, I still can't. Mainly though, it was just because we'd had some complaints a few years back about people being like, apparently they didn't want constructive criticism, they just wanted compliments, and so as a result, they had just said no, no constructive criticism for anyone. But they realized when they looked back on it, it was the middle school parents and the little kids that had complained the most. So, sorry, middle schoolers, but that's a no. But the high school kids and the adults, you will get feedback next year. So, yay! um, everyone else will still continue to get feedback kind of this way, but especially because I like doing this anyway, because it kind of gives a general overview for what people struggled with the most on average and how they can fix that, and what the winners did the best on average and how you can emulate that. So it's good anyway to go over things like this. I might start doing this for every contest, even though I give everyone feedback. So, first of all, with the categories for grading, we had a bunch of different categories this year as we graded on. This is a little different from the other contest because obviously it's the scary story contest. Different people are in charge. I'm only half in charge. I'm part of a two woman team. um, and that being said, in order to get past me, I'm first grader. Scary. Oh no. In order to get past me, my average score was, I would say, low average was a 20, high average was a 30. And in order to get past me, you had to get a 30. You had to be on the high end of the average. The main reason why, I give my secondary judge too much work because we gotta go through fast. And after I went through everything, the ones that scored a 30 and above, I only had about 30 of them out of the 100 that were turned in the teens category. So as a result, that made it way easier on her. So keep that in mind. And this is a 30 out of 55 points. So it's a low bar, but it's still pretty high. It's above half. um, so now for the categories that you're being graded on. First, how well did the story keep in mind the guidelines are slightly different for the scary story than they are for my average contest. We don't do font, we don't do anything like that. The main issue is just things like, does it have too much gore and violence? We did have to disqualify a story this year because it just 3 or 4 pages of like stabby stab, and like that's great and all for a slasher violence. So like we're okay with a little violence, we're okay with a little gore, but like when we say no graphic gore and violence, that means if it goes on for more than maybe 3 sentences, too much. And that's also good for next year. The nice thing though is that because we have this category, we didn't used to have this category. Now that we have this category, if you wanted to get a little graphically violent and do maybe more like a paragraph, you would just lose a point. So that would be a risk, but it'd be a calculated risk. You'd be like, okay, I realize this might be a little edgy, but I'm going to take that risk and take the 4 on that instead of the 5. Keep in mind though, like I said, if you do too much and you get like a 1 in that category, you'll just straight up be disqualified. If you're just blood and guts for 5 pages, no, throw that away. Clearly didn't care about the rule. All right, if you bend the rules, we're okay. If you just full on snap them over your knee, that's a whole other story. Um, Next year, we are also going to add a rule that it cannot be two handwritten entries this year. I accepted them because we technically didn't have anything on the flyer. We're adding that next year because it's just too hard to read people's handwriting. So, sorry, if your handwriting is disqualified automatically. I don't care how good it is. I'm not going to try and interpret your handwriting like old-timey hieroglyphics. All right. Next, grammar. This is not like nitpicky things. When I say grammatical, I mean, can I read this and not be easily confused by your grammatical styling? Are you using periods regularly? Are you using commas regularly? Are you using, like, you don't have to use them perfectly, but as long as they exist. Using no commas and no periods throughout the entire thing, you're probably going to get a 1. And if you also are changing tense like every 3 sentences, you're also going to. Just those are things to keep in mind. The main issue is tense change, just punctuation that is either lacking severely or way overly punctuated to the point where it's also confusing. So the main thing is just confusion. If you're confusing the judges, you're going to get lower points in the grammatical category. That's just kind of how it's going to work. That's the same with my story thing, though. So, good tips in general. All right. Then the third category is, does it grab your attention? And this year we said in the first paragraph, but several people turned in stuff without any paragraphs. And so as a result, we realized we need to change it, and we're going to say within the first 5 sentences. Now, do I realize that some paragraphs are larger than that? Yes. Typically, though, on average, your paragraphs should be about 5 to 6 sentences. Once you're hitting about 7 to 8 sentences, you're probably too long. You probably should cut it in half. Because we also did notice that too, where people would have paragraphs, but then the first paragraph would be like 12 sentences. And so I'm like, probably should cut that up. Make it a little shorter. So with that category, that was one incredibly hard category. That one is not going to be easy, period, just because everyone has different ideas of what a good first paragraph looks like. So that is very opinion based. On that one, I would just say go with your best in late, out early rule, gut instinct. Like, don't be describing for 5 pages what a bush looks like. Just if they're being attacked by a monster, get in there, let them be attacked. Like, yes, some suspense buildup is good, but if you're going to do suspenseful buildup, also maybe add some suspense in the way you talk about it. I actually had a really great entry that did this, but unfortunately they just barely got 28 points, so they did not make it onto the next round just because of bad character development. But they did a fantastic job with their first sentence, just knocked it out of the park. It was very ominous and spooky, and so even though their suspense was very well built up, unfortunately where they lost out was character development. But you can absolutely have a slow start with a really good first sentence. Typically, that's when, like I said, you add in a little spooky, you add in a little comedy, whatever is your main theme. Make sure that your first sentence demonstrates that. All right, next, plot development and character development. These are 2 separate categories, but I'm going to talk about them together because they go together. If your character is poorly developed, your plot is probably going to suffer, and vice versa. So that's why, even though they're separate categories, because you can have phenomenal character development and terrible plot, you can have that happen. It's just rare. So they're separated for the benefit of those who rock at one and are not so great at the other, but they do tend to be interwoven. With plot development, the best tips that I can give with this, as I've said probably a dozen times before, but I'm going to say it again because this was the main problem with this. If you cannot summarize your short story in less than 5 words, it is probably too long. You're going to make it rushed. You're not going to be able to build up things in time. You're not going to be able to foreshadow in time. It's going to be too much. You just aren't going to be able to make that word count work for you. The shorter the sentences for your idea, the better you're going to have a time of fitting it in that. I know it sounds great to have this like epic, amazing idea, but when you have a limit like we do with 1,500 words, that's the equivalent of trying to take like an elephant, squeeze it into a cookie jar. By the time you're done, it's just going to be gross mush. No, it's no longer an elephant. It's gross. It's not good. Doesn't matter how magnificent it was to start with. After you get done squishing it in that tiny little space, it's no longer good. And this can happen with a lot of plot development. It's really, really tricky. Now, the way you can get around this a little bit with the Scary Story Contest is by doing kind of a first chapter kind of vibe, but be warned, you will lose points in satisfying conclusion because it's not really a conclusion typically then, because first chapters typically end on some sort of a cliffhanger. So, beware, you'll lose points in that category, but if your idea just is too big, try a first chapter. You might nail it better than if you try to ramble. All right, next, character development. The biggest thing that was a struggle here is the fact that people felt they didn't have enough words, and so they just kept summarizing their whole life. You can show us what their life is like. You don't have to tell us every single little thing. And if you do, again, it's a novel idea. It's not a short story idea. If you have to tell us their entire childhood in order for the story to make sense, It's not a short story idea. It's a novel. And there's nothing wrong with having novel ideas. Novel ideas are great. They just don't belong in a short story contest. With character development, the best way to do this in short story format, especially with character development, is going to be, I would say, seeing them interact with other people. Can you do it when they are by themselves? Yes, but if you're going to do that, you've got to have them kind of almost be one of those characters like in the movies where they're like, "Oh, come on, no, no, no," and like saying things out loud so we can see their reactions. Especially that sometimes people do that, right? I know I tripped in my house the other day all by myself and I was like, "Ah, dang it," even though no one was there to hear me. So you can have moments like that that help characterize them. The more dialogue you have, the better it's probably going to be. And also, when I say dialogue, I don't just mean verbal, I mean inner dialogue too. Inner dialogue can be very nice. Although, one tip, because we had a few of the stories that did this, make sure inner dialogue sounds like actual inner dialogue. And if it doesn't, then you've got to explain why. Why is this person so quirky? Why do they talk in third person in their head? Or whatever. You got to make sure you explain it if they have something weird going on. Not just be like, this is normal, because it's not. It's okay to have an abnormal character, but you got to make sure you're not pretending they're normal if they're not normal. That would be like, ah, yes, unicorns talk. Normal. And everyone's just staring at you like, are you okay? Not normal. So, it's okay to have a very crazy character. That's not a problem. The problem is when you act like it's normal and then your readers are confused. All right. The other thing about character development, I would say, is how they interact with their environment, especially in scary stories. Because being scared is something that's going to cause a lot of emotion, right? A lot of panic. How do they react when they're panicked? If they react very calmly when they're panicked, explain why they react calmly. Because not everyone acts calm when they're panicked. Are they a soldier? Are they a cop? Are they a detective? Like, what background gives them the ability to just be like, boom, I'm fine, rather than being like, oh my gosh, I'm scared out of my wits, someone broke into my house, you know? Those are very different feelings. You also gotta make sure that you, when you're developing character, don't accidentally split the character. I saw this a few times too, where they were super scared throughout the entire thing, and then at the end they were like, peace, that was awesome, I'm going to bed. And it's like, what? You went from being scared to the point of almost peeing your pants to being like, nap time. I'm like, no one does that. You're either calm the whole time and go take a nap, or you're about ready to pee your pants and maybe actually do. Like that those are two different personalities. They should be blended and especially not in less than 10 seconds. Doesn't go well together. All right. Next thing. This is going to sound weird because of the way it's phrased, but I'm going to explain. Language use. When I say language use, I don't mean like what I mean by that is, do you show instead of tell? Is it artistically done? It's not just Sally went to school because Sally was scared. Sally did not like teddy bears. Like that's not going to be good language use. I'm going to give that maybe a 2 at best. And whereas good language use might be like, Sally held her teddy bear so tightly that if she had held on any tighter, his head might have popped right off. And that makes you go, okay, Sally's a little creepy. Sally really likes her teddy bears. But it does so in an artistic way. It does so in a way that's very much showing rather than telling, and the reader is able to feel immersed in the moment instead of just being told this verbatim, kind of like a textbook. All right. Next is satisfying conclusion. Again, this is where you might lose points if you do a first chapter kind of cliffhanger vibe. And I will say with the cliffhanger vibe, it's okay if your character dies in the end because that's still conclusive. That's different. But if the main character is about ready to die and then you're like dun dun dun, that's different. There's two different kinds of cliffhangers. One is they die at the end and then you're wondering if the serial killer gets caught, and the other one is they don't die at the end and you're still wondering if the serial killer gets caught. One is way more cliffhangery than the other. So there are acceptable kinds of cliffhangers, and then there are less acceptable kinds of cliffhangers that are better fits for a first chapter. But with satisfying conclusions, I noticed this was a big problem. It was not the category, funnily enough, it was not the category that people lost the most points in, but it was a category that was commonly low. Secondarily, I'd say. We're going to talk later about what the categories people lost the most points in were. But this was like second that people struggled the most with. And I think the reason why is because of the word count again. This just comes down to plot development and character development, and also taking out redundancies. A lot of people would describe a room and then forget they described the room and describe it again, and then they just wasted 12 words. And so you got to make sure that if you're describing things, you double check to make sure if you've already described that, you double check to make sure if you've already said that information. And also, even if your character has a stutter or something like that, don't overuse it because that's also going to burn through your word count. All right. Next is suspense. So we actually have two different categories in this regard. So you may have noticed on the forum we encourage humorous stories. We do. We love a good humorous scary story. We had 3 or 4 of them that ended up getting an honorable mention in the adult category that were so close to getting like first and third. So like it was good. But the way that this works is we have a suspense category and then a bonus humor category. So most people choose suspense, which is why it's in the normal category. But then the humor category is worth the same amount of points. Why? Because typically, if it's humorous, it's not suspenseful, and vice versa. You can have a blend, but it's hard. It's not easy, especially in a short form. So, suspense. If you lose points there, don't worry about it if your goal is to be humorous, and vice versa. With building suspense, though, the best thing that you can possibly do for suspense is make sure that you foreshadow subtly, especially in a short story. Normally, I've talked about in the past, you need to bluntly foreshadow as well as subtly foreshadow, not in the case of 1,500 words or less. Typically, you want to be as subtle as possible because it's so short, people are going to notice that just fine. The reason you need the blunt foreshadows with novels is because they're so long, people often forget things. And so you need to be a little bit more and be like, remember that. So your reader actually does remember it. Because there are times, I think I mentioned this before, I worked with this fabulous young author, and she had done a great job foreshadowing. But the problem is it was so subtle that by the time I reached the end of the book, I went, what? No way! And then I had to reread the book in all the sections that I thought proved me wrong, and then prove myself wrong. And and that was complicated. And so I was like, okay, let's go back and make this a little more blunt in areas, so people are like, oh, that's weird. And then when they reach here, they're like, oh, instead of being like, what? So with that, you don't really have to worry as much. You can be very subtle, and I would actually prefer subtle. We had actually far too many that were kind of, and so as a result, they lost points in the suspense category because it wasn't exactly suspenseful to be like, oh no, he seems oddly suspicious. Smack to the face. It's like, okay, if he's not suspicious, I'm going to be even more shocked. um, Now, next, the last category in the official grading is originality. This one basically is just, are you using your own original material? Are you writing fan fiction? And you're going to lose points in this category. Writing the same story as Stephen King's It with the creepy clowns and everything, but like you don't really do your own spin on it. In this category, it's more about doing your own spin on it, just because we see a lot of haunted houses, we see a lot of haunted mazes, we see a lot of zombies, we see a lot of there's a lot of things that repeat, but how you do them in a way is going to help determine originality. So, I we had some great stories about haunted houses and haunted dolls and all this different stuff, but it's about how you do it that makes it unique. All right. The first category that we had was wow slash something extra. That category was typically given extra points if we really liked your showing instead of telling. If that was just like really poetic and really awesome and really cool, and we were like, oh, that line was so awesome, then we might have given an extra point or two there. But we also gave an extra point or two in that category if it was extra scary and spooky or extra humorous and we didn't have enough points for it. So as a result, keep in mind that that is actually a really nice category to get some bonuses in because that actually can make or break it. The ones that ended up in first, second, and third in the adult category all had at least one, if not two, bonus points for the wow slash something extra factor. And that's part of what boosted them beyond the rest. So just keep that in mind. All right. So in the second round, you had to score at least a 25 in order to make it into the top 10. Now, this might not sound very hard because you're like, wait, I scored a 30 in the first round, but a 25 in the second round. That's because I am the easiest grader. I'm very nice. yes. I'm generally like, wow, that was awesome. And so as a result, I give you like a 3 and a 2, you know? So that's why you might score 30 on the first round and then a 25 on the second round. Because she's a little harsher. And then we only passed on the top 4 scoring ones of each category to the final grader. And so as a result, 25 was the minimum you had to get in order to get into the top 10. But we only passed out awards to 7 and up um, for honorable mentions and stuff. So normally we only do 5th place and 4th place for honorable mentions, but this one we had a lot of entries, so we did 7th. All right, so speaking of which, moving on to categories. In all cases for all graders, on average, the category that was lost the most points in, period, whether they were in ones that I graded and didn't pass along to the next one, or whether it was this top 10, the place that everyone lost the most points in was language use, plot development, and character development. Now, as I said before, we've kind of already talked about these categories, but just keep in mind those are going to be the most pivotal. They all kind of intertwine. If your language use is good, typically your character development is better. If your language use is good, typically your plot development is better. If your character development is better, it feeds your plot better, etc., etc. They are all so intertwined that most of the time what happened is if they did one of them badly, all of them suffered. And so even if you got like a 3 in plot development, if your character was bad, you might have had that drop. And so that made it hard. Unfortunately, those are really intertwined, very intertangled. But as I said before, I think the best things to look out for are just make sure your characters are consistent, make sure that you develop them using showing and not telling, and with the plot development, make sure that it's gonna fit in that tight little space. Next, okay. This is something that I noticed. I had a lot of people who built stories using journal entries or journal formatting. Especially if they're running down a hallway or something like that, you're not going to be like 11 o'clock still running down the hallway, 12 o'clock still running down the hallway. Like I saw a few entries like that. I'm like, dude, no one's going to stop to write a journal entry in the middle of running down a hallway to be like, still running. Like, no. Plus, that breaks up the suspense because of the fact that instead of being like, my blood's pumping, it's getting closer, you're just being like, I'm still running, yo. It doesn't really build as much suspense, and you can't really feel that scary emotion. So, even though they were great concepts, the concepts didn't work because I couldn't feel as scared as the character felt. It pulled me out. Journal entry format is just generally not recommended for 1,500 words and less. Can you do it well? Yes, I actually had someone who placed in an honorable mention category last year for the adults and did a journal format. But typically, you're going to want to make sure that if you're doing journal format, it's kind of broad. You're doing like one day at a time, and then all of a sudden someone dies at the end of the week, or whatever. But you also want to make sure that the journal doesn't sound like an actual journal, or that it sounds like a really old-timey journal. Because if you may have noticed, when you read old-timey journals, they actually add a lot of character depth to themselves. They characterize themselves, right? And they characterize other people. And they tell you all about their life, almost like a whole theatrical production. Most of the time, I bet you, if you guys have journals, you write, school was fine. That's not, exactly, there we go. Okay, I'm not totally crazy. Good. Thank you. I appreciate yes. Exactly, I give up. But that's why journal formatting is so hard to do if you're doing it realistically, because that's what a lot of people do, but that would get you low points in plot, low points in character. So if you're gonna do a journal development, you gotta write it almost like a theatrical journal instead of an actual journal. A lot of people wrote it like an actual journal would be written, and that just didn't develop plot and characters well. It's just hard. Oh, side note. Doing other formatting is encouraged in general, but know that you might suffer in certain categories, like with the journal thing. We also had one, for instance, that I'm actually going to email her today and let her know about that because she got 8th overall in the adult category. But the only reason why is because she wrote it in the form of a blog article. And so there was no character and there was no plot. So I technically had to give her a 1. I felt really bad though, because the rest of it was so funny and so interesting and so well developed world wise. And it was so well developed the way she used her language. And the ending of the article was really, really funny. So I had this satisfying conclusion. And so it hit all the other marks very well. But I just couldn't give it those final points because the plot and the character were not there, quite literally. So it's not that you can't do other formats, just beware of what it might do to your score. All right, so when it comes down to an entry that sounds like a beginning chapter novel, Susie and I went into the woods, and sounds like a YA novel, Susie was walking through the woods and her blood, she could hear it rushing in her ears. Where'd you go, Katie? That's going to be much more interesting. And it's not that beginning chapter books are bad. It's just the scary story contest is not the place for it. If you're trying to be scary, it's not going to hit those notes as well. It's not going to be suspenseful and maybe not even as humorous because it's going to be more kiddish humor. We are adult judges. And so as a result, if we are grading on this, I had a few that were like that, where I was like, this would make a really great beginner chapter book for like 7 to 8-year-olds. But as an actual scary story, it wasn't that scary. Because it was written with a lower language quality, because they're trying to write it for a younger audience. And there's nothing wrong with that. Scary story just isn't the place for that. It's just not goes well. All right. So, a summarized story will not be good as a fully told out one. I also had this, a lot of people were like, okay, I'm going to tell you in like perfect language use, perfect prose for like 3 paragraphs, and then I'm just going to summarize the ending. And I'm like, okay, but why though? And also I had a lot of stories that were summarized just in general. It told me about this whole legend, this whole lore, and this whole ghost story, but I never felt scared ever because I couldn't feel anything. I was just like, why do I care about Jim? Jim just exists. Tell me why I should care about Jim. But it was just like, Jimmy was scared, and I'm like, why? Like, I don't feel it. When you summarize things instead of fully showing them, I don't feel anything. And so it could be the best idea in the world, but if it's summarized, I'm not going to feel it. You need those emotions in order to have good characterization. Hello. All right. So let's see. Yeah. All right. So next thing to take into account with writing scary stories. Stories that require tone or being read aloud don't do as well in a short story contest on paper. We actually had a lot of those where if I had seen them performed by someone, the woods creaked and cracked, they walked along, that's cool. But when I read that on a page, I don't hear that. I don't see that performance. And so there were a lot of those that sounded like traditional ghost stories that would be awesome if I saw them performed like an actual teller on stage. But to read them as an actual page, they were kind of just because I don't have that performance. I don't have that extra zhuzh that the narrator adds with their tone, with their body language, with their movements. And so it didn't make it as scary. So I will say, don't use tips and tricks from telling ghost stories out loud. Those aren't actually going to be helpful for the scary story contest because it's paper. And paper does not do the same stuff as a vocalization does. All right. Next.
Reading ghost stories or scary stories is kind of funny for me because I read in like my internal voice isn't very matter of fact, like
exactly.
Correct.
But see, that's my point. That's why you need to write it in such a way that even with a matter of fact tone voice, you can still feel scared.
Yeah.
That way you still feel it. Thank you. You demonstrated my point excellently.
It's because my favorite book is like a very matter of fact, and so they launched into this big adventure, and we will soon see how it plays out.
But yes, so that's the thing though. You need to have that ability to feel those things and see those emotions and feel that in your soul because your head isn't going to translate that. Unfortunately, it's just a hard part of paper versus words. All right, next thing, make sure you actually describe things. For example, if you say the room smelled clean, What does that smell like? Does that smell like Clorox? Does that smell
A
like
new
no
car.
dust? Yeah,
I
does
hate
that
new
smell
car
like a
smells.
new car? Like, what does it smell like? But
They
see,
make me like pass out. I'm like, ooh.
but that's the point though, is what does that smell like? If you say it smells dirty or it smells clean or it smells odd or weird, that's not
Musty.
helpful.
What about
Exact
musty?
musty's okay because it's actually a scent. Just saying general, that would be like, for example, me saying, my cat is a cat.
Wow.
Not
Whoa.
helpful. And so that's the equivalent of saying that it smelled dirty or it smelled clean, because of the fact that we don't know what that smells like. What does that smell like? Tell me. So you that going back to the cat example, when you say my cat is an orange tabby, see now that gives us context. So like musty works or dusty um, or Clorox, or you could even say they smelled absolutely nothing at all. It was so clean or something like that. Those all add a very interesting context. And especially if you're going to use the word weird, don't just say it was weird or it sounded weird. What does weird sound like? Tell me, please. I had so many moments when I was like, this could be a good story if you'd just stop using such vague descriptors.
What if you're what if you're doing like a very modern story and you do like some like the characters internal monologue? It's like, what is that weird noise?
Weird noise is fine, if you're doing an internal monologue. The issue is when you're narrating it and say it's a weird noise because it's your job as the narrator to tell us what it is.
Okay.
Um, so it would be kind of different than just me. Like for example, if I was talking to you, I might say, "What is that weird noise?" But if or I might think that in my head. But just if I was narrating this room, I wouldn't say there is a weird noise. I would say there's a clicking in the corner. You know,
No.
that
Stay
gives.
away.
But see exactly that evokes much more of a nope response than it was a weird noise.
I read the Valley and there's like this weird thingy in his closet and it made like clicking noises and so now I have like trauma.
You're like, nope, no clicking.
Any clicking noises I'm
But see, that's the thing though, is that's why you need descriptors of what things sound like. Because if you just make them super generalized and vague, then the person's like, I don't really feel immersed in this story because I don't know what you're talking about. All right, next. Don't list legends or ghost stories or any other freaky thing as being an actual fact in an actual place if it doesn't actually exist. It's okay if you're going to be like, this is a new thing that just popped up. But if you're like, this well known legend from um, Kanab, Utah, or something like that, and then I Google Kanab, Utah, and Kanab, Utah has no ghost stories whatsoever, I'm going to be like, it doesn't read as fun and as cool because they're breaking reality. Actually, base it on a real ghost story? Heck yeah! That's awesome. If you base it on an actual legend, absolutely. Or if you base it on actual news, yes. But if you're just saying everyone knew about this serial killer that doesn't actually exist, I'm gonna be like, yes.
See, what if mine is technically not like a ghost story? It's just a short story that's meant to make you feel kind of scared, and it's like not based in a ghost story.
Not based in a ghost story.
Like it's not based in like months.
That's okay. It's fine if you want to make something up. For example, Psych does this where they make up serial killers and stuff like that, but they have them be very localized so that I wouldn't know about it. And beyond that, they make it so that it's like, oh, it's happening right now kind of thing. And so, of course, I wouldn't know about it. Or different things like that. But if you say, like, this legend is 2,000 years old in this specific spot in Arizona, and I Google that spot and there's no 2,000-year-old legend,
Well,
that's
it's
frustrating.
kind of like a happening now. Like it's in older times, so there's like more
If
villages.
you're going to have it happen in such a way that modern times would not have known about this because everybody died or something like that,
Yeah,
then
kind of
yeah, then that's totally fine. It happens when people are like, everyone knows this legend, and no one knows the legend.
Okay.
That's when the problem
Because
occurs.
basically he like sucks the entire village into a black hole in his mouth, and then it just disappears from reality. Nobody remembers it.
See, that's fine. That's fine because no one's going to remember it exists. That's the point of the story. But if you said everyone remembers this legend, it's super important and
so
no
that
one
nobody
knows,
remembers him.
then
Everyone knows the legend except they forgot.
except everyone knows the legend except they all don't. What? Wait,
Everybody
back up.
knew the legend before he ate them.
Before he ate them. Anyway, it just ruins the illusion. It's not necessarily that they can do that, but keep in mind you will lose points. Most likely in the category of satisfying conclusion, just because it's not going to be as satisfying if it's just random made up stuff. So, random made up stuff is all fine and good as long as you don't base it in reality.
I like more things that like connect. Like
Yeah, I'm okay with. For
like,
example, if you want to take a really old ghost ship that actually exists and do that,
and be like,
heck yeah. Heck yeah.
I like origin stories.
Exactly.
Like I bottom of the ocean.
Exactly.
And
yes.
then you're like, oh, that's why.
Yes, those can be super cool, but you gotta make sure you're basing it in actual stuff instead of just being like I said, the problem comes in when you say everyone knows something and they don't. Then you're like, okay, but they don't. So why am I think like why do I care? All right. So pick something unique to make sure to put your own spin on it. As I just said before, we get a lot of stories about haunted forests, wendigos, ghosts, dolls, haunted hospitals, clowns, zombies. Like, you know the classic list. And there's nothing wrong with doing the classic list, but just make sure that it doesn't, if you're doing zombies, it's not The Walking Dead. You know, if you're doing dolls, make sure it's not Chucky. You know, that kind of stuff. Make sure it's your own unique thing and that it doesn't use all the generic tropes because there also are just a lot of generic tropes. And if it just sounds like a bunch of generic cliche tropes all shoved together, it's not very original, even if you're the one who wrote it.
I watched the Maze Runner movies last week. Traumatizing.
You're like, ah.
The second I don't read dystopians, it's not my thing. So watching a dystopian is great. Everybody was like,
everybody dies.
Literally, everybody dies. There is no plot armor. I'm like, where's the plot armor? We need it. The second movie was more.
Yeah, that's pretty much that kind of describes dystopian in general. With dystopias, there is no plot armor.
I know. I like my plot.
The plot armor is on the plot, not the characters. The plot will survive throughout the whole thing, even if everyone dies.
It sure did.
So, next thing is don't do moral dilemmas. They don't really end well. The reason why I end well is not because you couldn't do a phenomenal ending, but more just because of the fact that people feel very much judged. If you're doing a moral dilemma thing, if you're doing, like, for example, don't eat your vegetables, then you're gonna die. Phones are bad. Energy drinks are bad. This is bad. That is bad. Whatever. Like, I had a few stories like that where I was like, the concept was good, but then at the end, basically, it was just like, moral of the story is this is bad. And I was like, that just feels very judgmental. And therefore, this conclusion is infinitely less satisfying. If you want to make it that energy drinks are bad because, like, a certain brand of energy drinks, like, put souls in their drink or something like, that sounds awesome. But if you're just saying all of them are bad universally and they will all murder you in your sleep, that's gonna make a lot of people feel really judged, and you're gonna get less points just in general because they're gonna be like, that was rude, that hurt my feelings. I don't even drink energy drinks, but it kind of hurt my feelings because I was like, that's really judgy, you know? So if you're gonna do moral dilemmas, just make sure that you involve either the supernatural or involve that doesn't actually exist, or you, if, for example, with phones are bad, have it be something about the phone, have it be like, you know, a certain app or something like that. Don't have it just be the phone itself is the evil
like
villain.
In Wednesday, how there's like the siren song.
Yes, exactly.
The sirens who are like,
thank you.
You are so awesome.
Exactly. Or like I've had other or speaking of X Files, anyway, and weird things. Or you can have like other things happen, or that are odd or weird, or like a murder because someone, you know, like texted their friend just before they were murdered and told them they wanted to kill them, and you're like, what? Are they the killer? You know, that's fine. But being like, the phone itself is bad just existing, that feels kind of not fun.
I would like to share one of my favorite tropes.
Okay.
I love it when it's like a mystery and somebody figures it out and they're like, oh, I figured it out, and then they run to like the telephone or something. This works better in old times because they don't have like a cell phone, and so they're like running to like the little telephone box thingy on the street, and they're dialing the number, and they're like, I've got something to tell you, and they're like, what is it? And then they get killed right right before they can tell
And
me,
then
and then I'm like,
the phone hangs up and there's the dial tone. Yeah.
it's so
It is
awesome.
cool. Yeah, I agree. See, now you can do stuff like that or
It's not
something
my
like that.
favorite.
But
I don't even like
once
it
you start
that
having
much.
moral things where it's like the moral of the story is that this thing sucks. It's like, well, why did I read this? So if you're gonna have something be bad, have it be a subtle, have it be a very subtle thing that you're like, I don't like this thing, and so I'm gonna write a scary story about it being bad. Don't like
I don't like
this is bad.
I don't like black hole mouth people.
Make sure that you're subtle if you're going to do something that's actually like potentially judgy. All right. So next thing is you need a natural flow of logic in your stories. Now, having characters be dumb isn't the problem.
Characters, okay?
Yeah, that's
They're
not a
my
problem.
favorite.
Dumb
They're
characters, like
this guy is dumb as a rock.
see, that's fine. Dumb characters can be fun, they can be funny, they can be interesting, especially in horror because you got the dumb jock or the ditzy cheerleader. Oh my gosh!
No, I
you know,
hate dumb characters, not horror movies.
but a lot of people like doing them. Is my point.
I like
But
dumb strong characters.
if you do dumb characters, you gotta establish their dumbness first. Because if you don't establish their dumb, then we're going to be like, dude, why are they so dumb? And then we're just gonna be so frustrated we can't actually feel the scariness. So you gotta establish the dumbness first. But second, if you don't have a dumb character and they're just making dumb decisions for seemingly no reason, you gotta have a reason. For example, if they're incredibly scared, they actually might do dumb stuff. There's
A lot of
actually
people do dumb stuff
yeah,
when they're scared.
there's actually I can't remember the name of it, but there's this bell curve effect where basically the more scared you get, the more dumb you get. Yeah, I don't remember the exact name, but anyway, point being is that it is an actual phenomenon. So if you're going to do that, you also have to make sure you show how scared they are. Show that they are just out of their mind, panicked. Because then when they do dumb stuff, you're like, oh yeah, totally, I've done dumb stuff when I'm panicked. But if they just like running and they're perfectly calm, and then all of a sudden they're like, I'm gonna do it for smart. You're like, why? Also, logic needs to flow naturally as far as your monsters go too. If you say your monsters can't walk into the light, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, I'm in the light now and it's fine.
Wait, what if the monsters are evolving and that's the
Yes, but see, that needs to also be told to the reader. If you don't tell the reader or show the reader that they are evolving, then it's just confusing. It doesn't actually play well. Exactly. It's like, but what? You just told me that they can. And so you need to actually explain these things. You can't just be like, and now it does. Because then people get frustrated. All right. Also, you need to have logic flow naturally according to what actually would happen in real life. For example, I had about 3 different stories that involved people getting locked in their high school at night, and there was no janitor and no nothing.
Why does the janitor matter?
Because of the fact that there would be a janitor and the janitor would catch you.
Oh, I was like,
so,
I was like, why does the janitor detail?
The janitor detail matters because in every story they were like, I'm all alone.
Dude,
and I'm like, janitors literally clean until like 9 p.m. So you wouldn't just be alone in the school.
I was there until 11 one time for like a play, and the janitors were still there, and we're like, all right, we're going on lockdown at 11. That's what we do. And I was like, are you guys here at 11?
Yeah, some go even later. Exactly. If there's a play or there's a if there's a play or a performance, they go even later. And so there were a lot of ones where they were like, oh, it's after the football game and no one's here. And I'm like, the janitors would exactly. Everybody's there after the football game. And B, exactly, everybody just chills around for about 2 hours. A. Yeah. And B, the janitors would be there. And so I'm like, no, you're not alone. Lies. So if you're gonna have a realistic scenario, make sure it's actually realistic.
Perfect.
Exactly.
The monster.
Thank you. Now that would make that weird kid. But see, that's the thing. That would make it way scarier if, for example, there's a janitor there, and then all of a sudden he says hi to the janitor, and then he turns around and there's a blood stain, and he's like, like, where'd the janitor go?
Oh,
exactly. That makes it A, funny potentially, and B, like, oh my gosh, Jerry! Like,
Jerry.
That makes it so much scarier, right? To be like, it's picking this up one by one, instead of just being like, I am alone, even though I realistically would not be. So you got to make sure if you're putting them in a scenario that scenario actually could feasibly happen. You're not just like, it happened because I wanted to. All right. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about what the winners did well and what they all could have improved on. So, with the top winners in the middle school category, the things they did best were character development and plot development. Middle school category, a lot of middle schoolers don't know how to develop plot very well. I'll be honest. I'm not saying that to be rude, it's just a fact. It does tend to be less. And so as a result, on average, most middle schoolers score about a 3 on character development, I would say. And so if you automatically score, like, I would say for me personally, like 4, then you're already ahead of the game. um, and then next thing is for the high school category. Um, Similarly, but I would say plot and character. The people who won were the people who did the best at plot and character development. Just because, again, though that not only relays into so many other things, it's very intertwined with a bunch of other categories that get you automatically better points. But also, the more connected we are to a scary story character, the more scary it will feel, and the more bonus points you will get. Which means, again, boost. So, the best thing you can do is to connect us to that character and to have a solid plot. Um, I would say, as far as the adults go, classical scary is just easiest. We actually had most of the honorable A, not classical scary, but still terrifying, or B, humorous. And it's not that humorous ones can't win. We actually had a humorous one win third place last year. But I will say it is harder purely because of the fact that when you're doing humorous, sometimes people forget to develop characters well because they're so busy focusing on the next joke. And so as a result, it does make it hard. Not impossible, but hard because the setup for the joke or the setup of the character. Just happens.
My favorite for things is like drama, but like there's a funny overtone.
Exactly. That does tend to score higher. I would agree. All right. As far as what honorable mentions could have improved in order to get to first, second, and third. In the middle school category, it really was just about plot. Um, they were good concepts, they were good characters, but the plot just had a few loopholes, a few logic errors, a few things that just were like, I'm confused. I want more like understanding here. I want to know more about this character through the plot rather than just being like info dumped about this character and then there's a plot on the side kind of thing. And then for the high schoolers, I would say part of the issue was too many characters. A lot of the people who scored in the honorable mention category just had so many characters. Even just like 3, but there were 3 characters is a lot for 1,500 words. It is a lot. Um, and so it made it a lot harder to be able to characterize them all well. And it also made it a lot harder to do the plot as well because you're losing word count via adding more characters. Um, and a few of them, I would say, with honorable mention, just lost even like a few points, like 3 or 4. And normally that was in ones like the first paragraph where like the rest of the story was fantastic, but that first paragraph was a little slow. And so that was also a problem a few of the honorable mentions had, where if they had gotten started a little snappier, they might have boosted their score, gotten a little farther. Um, with the adults, as I said before, it really wasn't about improvement so much as it was about classic horror is going to naturally score better. Can humor win? Yes, like I said, we've had several humorous ones win second and third, and sometimes even first in the past. But it is very hard to develop your character and set up well for humorous jokes. And so there were times when often for example, there was this really like 2 or 3 really funny ones. One was about a fly being absolutely terrified of the giant spiders on people's lawns during Halloween. I thought it was hilarious. And I loved their characterization of the fly. It was absolutely fantastic, actually. And I honestly thought it was going to win.
Wait, what was the fly about?
It was scared of all the Halloween decorations of giant spiders because it had trauma because its family had been eaten by spiders.
That's genius.
Right? It was so genius.
For
but it didn't get as many bonus points because of the fact that it was so focused on the humor. It got bonus points for humor, but it didn't get the bonus points for the wow factor because they weren't doing as much with their prose, they weren't doing as much to scare people, and so as a result, it didn't excess bonus points. The line between humor and scary is very thin. It's especially with novels. With novels, it's an entirely different beast because you can do gallows humor, as they call it, appropriately, where 99% of it is scary and then 1% of it is like, I gotta make a joke because if I don't, we're all gonna cry. Like,
I love those
yes,
books.
that's gallows humor. And it
Yes,
can go
those
really
are my
well,
favorite.
but it's hard to do with short stories just because it kind of breaks the tension a little bit more. Um, and as a result, it can also, just in general, be affected by various things. Um, with that one, the other area that it suffered in was plot, just because the plot did take a while to build up, and so as a result, it was a little slow build. And so by the time they got there, the ending felt a little rushed, just a smidge, not a lot. They lost maybe 2 points, but in the grand scheme of things, that's going to lose you that top spot, you know. And then the other honorable mention that was a humorous one was about a ghost hunter going into a haunted house and then getting in the middle of a divorced ghost couple fighting.
That's so funny.
It was absolutely hilarious. I loved it, but it didn't do as much characterization of him because it was busy characterizing the ghosts. And so he lost some points for characterization. Right. Not that it was bad, but it was just harder to characterize two ghosts plus the ghost hunter is just a lot.
Is it available to read the stories?
Unfortunately, no.
No.
They don't do that for the scary stories. We thought about at one point publishing all of them all in a short story anthology, but the guy we were talking to, for whatever reason, didn't get back to us. So, sad day.
What if the individual authors give you consent?
Theoretically, yes. Perhaps. And then the other funny one that I thought was really great was about this nerdy kid who had gotten dared into going to this house. And he was super scared, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, she's gonna like eat me alive!" And I was like, "What is she, like a cannibal?" No, it's a cheerleader. And he's terrified. So
that's giving Monster House. I watched Monster House the other day.
It was really fun. I really liked it. It was a very much twist on the like haunted house, scary lady down the block. Except, oh no, it's just the hot girl at your school. So I liked it a lot. It was very fun and funny. I think the issue with that one was because it actually built up suspense and humor so well that once again, as I said, the risk of building up suspense and humor well is that you don't build up the characters well. And so I didn't really know much about him. I liked him, but I didn't really know much. He was just kind of the classic nerd. I don't really know much about him as a unique human being. And then the one that got fourth place was an absolutely terrifying story of a cave diver. But because it was more realistic horror.
Cave divers, I read a story about.
Yep, exactly.
The soccer team that got trapped in a cave.
Yep.
Because of flood.
It's terrifying. Yeah, so that's why I was like, it was realistically terrifying in the regard that the idea of drowning in a underwater submerged cave somewhere is terrifying.
Nobody would.
But exactly, nobody would ever find you. It's like, ah! Anyway, so it was very scary. But it wasn't classically horror. And the top three were very classically horror. The top one was a one about a shepherd of souls, shepherding them to the afterlife.
Oh my god!
Classic spooky. And then the second place one was about running into a fae in the wilderness that turns you into some sort of hideous beast. And I do say you because that was a choose your own story one. And then the third place one was about someone who was so used to being pranked that she didn't think she was in any danger, and then by the time she realized she was in danger, she died. And so, kind of again, those are all kind of classic horror things. And so and so as a result, that fourth place one was really scary. But I will admit, classic horror does sometimes have just this ring to it that is hard to beat. It got, like I said, 1 to 2 bonus points at minimum for most of the graders for the top 3. And whereas the other one that was equally scary, but it just didn't get those bonus points because there was a lean towards classic horror. So keep that in mind. The classics are classic for a reason, but at the same time, be willing to branch out. There's nothing wrong with branching out. Just be aware that branching out might not earn you the top spot. But then
And,
again, I say might.
and different people.
Exactly.
My
Different
mom,
things are scary to different people.
my mom doesn't like war and man versus man stuff.
Yeah.
And I am terrified of natural disasters.
Yeah, exactly.
And she loves natural disasters. And I really like this stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
different
I don't
things
like
scare different
war,
people.
but I like the interesting stuff.
I will say that we will have the same three judges every year, though, until we either leave or retire. Um, so as a result, that is the current bias, I will tell you, is leaning towards classic horror.
Okay.
Classic ghost story, classic, like,
Yeah,
you're gonna die,
telling us
murder,
about the
etc.
current bias.
It is not illegal because I think it's just fair to learn that your judges do like classic horror a little more. And
Yeah.
that's something that's important to know. It's not that your story can't be fantastically terrifying and be a realistic story, but
That's why teachers give you
that's not
rubrics.
scary to everyone.
Because
Exactly.
they know that they're biased and they want to put more points on something else.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we have the grading sheet, is because of the fact that we have this rubric in order to make it so that we're as close as possible. But I just wanted to let you guys know that I grade mostly on how scary it is. I don't care whether it's classical horror or not, but my other two graders do lean more towards classical Halloweeny horror
Wait,
stuff.
what does your handwriting look like?
What does my handwriting look like? We're gonna handwriting analyze me today. All right.
I just want to know so that I can look at my past ones and see which
All right.
ones you.
You can just ask in the future, and I'll tell you.
Oh, okay.
But
I'll just
anyway,
read them and ask.
I will also say, if you look at all three, I'm typically the one that grades you the highest.
Oh, okay. I know which one you are.
Yeah, it's because of the fact that, like I said, I purposely have three different types of graders. Me, who's super like, I love everything, and then there's the medium grader who's like, it's solid.
That was
and
my
then,
favorite of the grading because she gave me the most feedback.
And then there's super harsh grader. She is actually she well that's her job though in some ways is to be as honest and blunt as possible. But I will say she is no longer one of our graders. Unfortunately, she got super busy, has a bunch of other projects she's working on. But we have a similar new grader. And he does exactly the same kind of grading, but he does give more feedback.
Is it the soft-spoken guy who works downstairs?
No, not Who's actually.
Oh.
Ta-da.
I want to know all of the names of the librarians so you can be like, hey, Tom.
I mean, I'd be happy to tell you all the names of the librarians, but anyway, just keeping that in mind. Those are some of the things you know and be aware of as far as scary story goes. Do you have any questions about scary story writing in specific? Yeah, shoot.
So, if I like